In a familiar pattern, another African country, Gabon, falls to the hands of the military, the sixth in 3 years. Is the recent spate of coups on the continent revolutionary? This is Africa Update on Trust TV, reaching you from Abuja, Nigeria's capital. I am Ayuba Ilya. Thanks for joining. Gabon is the sixth African country now taken over by the military after Mali, Chad, Guinea, Sudan, Burkina Faso and Niger in the last 3 years. Shortly after the Gabon's electoral body declared the incumbent President Ali Bongo winner of the country's presidential election, army officers appeared on national television announcing they had taken power. Now, many African countries are not new to military takeovers, which is more often considered as revolutionary, with the trailing celebrations on the streets. Out of 54 countries on the African continent, 45 have had at least one coup attempt since 1950, according to data collected by Powell and Thine. Now, the data also reveal that between 1960 to 1969, the African continent recorded 25 successful coups out of 41 attempts, the highest number over the decades. But this has not translated into meaningful development for the continent. So, is the recent spate of coups a repeat of history, or is it truly revolutionary? Now, to discuss this, I have joining me from Brussels in Belgium, Fabrice Lena, who is a Cameroonian politician and humanitarian. Thank you so much for joining us on Africa Update, Fabrice.
Thank you for having me, Ayuba. Thank you so much, all the listeners of Trust TV across the continent. Right. I am glad to be your guest once more for us to analyze the situation of military takeovers in Africa, and especially the recent coup in Gabon.
Okay. You know, Fabrice, since the news broke out about Gabon, a lot of people have been talking and asking, where is next? And fingers are pointing to your country, Cameroon, and perhaps, you know, some other presidents like Equatorial Guinean President Teodoro Obiang, who himself have been in power for a very long time. Talk to us about what Cameroonians are saying since this news broke out.
Yeah, Cameroonians are very anxious. The experience of only knowing leadership of two presidents, and those two presidents have not propelled the country to a different level of development, where one could say civilian leadership is better than those of the military guys. So Cameroonians are anxious, Cameroonians are impatient, Cameroonians are like, oh, many of the guys are not talking today. You can read it all over the social media. Some are wishing that Cameroon could also fall into the hands of the military. Meanwhile, others are like, oh, okay, are we abandoned? Has God forgotten about Cameroon? What is our situation? And, you know, this kind of calls and declarations and talks is coupled with the fact that Cameroon has never had free and fair elections since multipartism. And of course, you know, many guys are actually wishing for a military takeover in Cameroon now. But for us, we do think that when you wish for something, you should be ready for it, because we must take precaution as to who is actually and who is capable. And of course, when you look at Cameroon military since 1984 coup attempt that failed, April 1964 coup attempt that failed, there have been a lot of grip, divide and rule by the president, who controls nearly all factions of the military with strong grip. And he keeps one faction of the military to control the other. And it makes it very difficult for Cameroon to have a true revolutionary military, except otherwise, as one could say, never say never in this kind of situation.
This news has also sent shivers, across the continent, regionally and even internationally. We've seen in Rwanda, for instance, the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, has decided to retire 12 generals from the armed forces. In Cameroon as well, we heard the news about the reshufflement of the Ministry of Defense and the likes. What do you make of this?
A day after the coup in Gabon, Paul Biya came to do some internal reshufflement at the Ministry of Defense and also some touches at the level of the military. But even if they reshuffle, guys who would want to perpetrate, who would want to take it in the form of a revolution, they will still do that. They will absolutely do that. So this will not stop people who already have a plan or hinder them to carry out their plans. I'm sure of that.
Fabrice, it's becoming increasingly difficult to condemn military coups on the continent. In the international scene, yes, we've seen the AU, the EU, and other international bodies condemn the coup in Gabon. However, in Gabon itself, on the streets of Gabon, it's like liberation for them. So where do we stand? How do we, how should we react to some of these things? On one hand, the people have not gotten dividends of democracy. On the other hand, people say, well, we shouldn't have military takeovers. So how do we get, politicians or would say the dividends of democracy?
But one of the remarkable things about the coups of these times, since 2020, is that they are bloodless, which means that the aim of most of these guys is not just to get the presidents ousted and eliminated, but to do some necessary institutional and systemic reforms, which of course we've seen them in some other countries that are under the military guide. But we are still to observe if over time this is going to be what actually motivated them to take power. It's often said that you can't be so sure of who you entrust power to unless the person delivers to the end, to the very end, what they promised or the objective for which they seized the power. In Africa, one could observe in one hand that there are some countries that have successfully been governed by civilian presidents without any worries. One could say these countries enjoy stability, constitutional democracy, and rotative presidencies where when presidents are defeated from power, they accept defeat, step down, and allow other people to come up. This is a case of a country I've taken interest in, like Zambia, with the defeat of the founding president in 1991, Kenneth Kaunda. When Fedric Chiluba defeated him, he accepted defeat and stepped down. And then when Fedric Chiluba himself was defeated in the 2005 elections, he accepted defeat and stepped down. And recently, as recent as in 2021, we saw President Hashelima defeated President Edgar Lungu. He accepted defeat and stepped down. So if countries in Africa practice this culture where they stick to the constitution, they adhere to the institutions that have been designed by the country's people, and of course they respect the term of office and do not seek to modify the clandestine manner these constitutions to stay in power ad infinitum, we will enjoy these democracies. And if this democracy comes with increase in development index, increase in the welfare of the people, and of course the spirit of the values of the African culture, our communities, and emancipation, no one will have any problem. If this is accompanied by peace and stability and gradual growth of the country, no one will have any problem with civilian leaders.
All right. Okay, Fabrice. All right, Fabrice, I would ask a question that, do you think that perhaps we should accept the reality of military coups on the continent by maybe formalizing or constitutionalizing military coups on the continent, to say that if a civilian government doesn't do right by the people, the military have the power to decide to set that government aside?
As an aspiring leader, I would say it's a very difficult question because military rule is very putative, something that trusting someone with gun is just like casting a vote of confidence to a politician whose ideology and political agenda is not clear, you know. And of course, it's a vote of confidence where it's the output that can tell whether your decision was right or wrong. You know, it's just like you had to conduct some kind of super intelligence to understand that, well, this guy mean well for the people, doesn't mean well for the people. Because sometimes even the indicative factors could be true or false, will not always be very, very, very indicative of the true situation that we're talking about. So what I'm trying to say here is that this is a question that, you know, if the different assemblies of the different countries could approve of it, maybe in the context of the countries, and of course, if these questions were to be taken to the Pan-African Parliament and the EU, it will be a better place for us to have a concrete answer based on a majority of the people's wish. But since democracy also, by the participatory method, is failing, it will now be difficult on what method, what strategy, what tool.
Okay, Fabrice, we have the AU, we have the ECOWAS, and we have other sub-regional bodies, you know, who sometimes we look up to, you know, to put a check on certain African leaders who are not doing right by its people. How do we strengthen these institutions? Sometimes it gets very difficult considering that some of the leaders from the various countries themselves are not true democrats, but yet they get to represent their countries in these bodies. So how do we make sure that people representing us at that level and the institution itself has a way of, you know, checkmating some of these dictators?
When the leaders are unable to deliver in their own countries, you don't expect them to deliver at the level of the regional bloc. And when you look at AU today, they are so silent on issues that are very pertinent across the continent. They are so silent on peace and security questions, on internal conflicts, on the conflicts that they should have voted for direct intervention, on issues that they were supposed to take as primordial concern. But of course, you understand why they are silent, because they themselves are unable to rule or lead by good faith.
Well, thank you so much, Fabrice Lena, Cameroonian politician and humanitarian worker. We appreciate you joining us on Africa Update and sharing your perspectives with us.